Hello, Brick Sculptors, and welcome back to Brick Sculpt. This is Chris, and today we're going to talk about unlocking the secrets of the Lego grid. Now, I've done a couple of videos on this already, but I'll go ahead and get you caught up if you haven't seen those. If you do want to see them, I'll link them at the end. But this is a grid that I have previously named the Suge Knight grid. People have commented that this grid is the optimum way to make sugarcane in Minecraft. I've never played, I'll take your word for it. And it also uses the same layout as the chess knight move. So I started with the Suge Knight grid. Unfortunately, it didn't totally roll off the tongue, so from now on, this is going to be called the Sugar Grid, at least on my channel. The beauty of the Sugar Grid is it connects Lego in two different directions. You can connect pieces in the way of the standard grid. You can also connect pieces at a specific angle. And the cool thing about it is you can connect any piece at any place at that same angle. No matter the size or shape, it will fit in either direction. Pretty cool, huh? Now, after showing off the Sugar Grid, the next step was to figure out how we can fill around this to make our regular plate back into a square grid in one seamless piece. And the best way that I found to do that was using wedge plates. And these wedge plates are of the slope where it's 1 by 3. That's the appropriate angle to use for this grid. Putting 4 of those around our plate, we can then combine them with a second one in the opposite direction, which will allow us to correct for the angle of this plate. I tried doing the same thing with snot technique. It worked, but it was a lot sloppier. This works a lot better, at least in my opinion. Play around with it, see what you can find out. And then we can just fill around this. Now keep in mind, I'm missing a few attachment points here, but at this point I'm building in standard Lego grid. So I wouldn't have to have all the Sugar Grid here. I could have as many studs as I want in here to fill this up more appropriately. And the reason I'm using all these mixed colors here is so you can kind of see the pieces better. Obviously in a build you'd probably have one color here, but to let you guys visualize this better, it's easier to see if I use different color parts. So you can see this fills out pretty nicely. I used another technique in the video I did about this. You can watch that at the end of the video if you like. It is going to leave some gaps in every way that I try to do this, so you have to figure out a way to kind of try to minimize those. But it's pretty cool. You can take that angled plate and go back to the standard grid pretty seamlessly. Another cool thing you can do with the Sugar Grid is you can build with angles in your build. For example, let's say you wanted to make a walkway. You could put angles right in it, changing to a different direction, building in that direction, and then changing back. Pretty cool stuff. Now there are some rules to this. This grid really likes to work with 6 wide. 6 by 6 is ideal for it. So you have to kind of play with it. Some of these transitions aren't going to work depending on where you put it on the grid. And you might need to make the grid in the opposite direction. So basically each stud would move one in the other direction to give it, instead of a spiral this way, it'd be kind of this way. And then you could get your angles to go the other way. But either way, pretty cool stuff here. You can make a really cool walkway. You could probably do something cool with water, with a meandering river or something like that with this technique. So a lot of cool stuff you can play around with there. Another awesome thing you can do with the Sugar Grid is stacking. So you can take a small Sugar Grid and build it on top of a piece, set it up in the normal orientation, rotate it one, stick it down, grab another one in the same orientation, rotate it one, stick it down, and you could do this as many times as you want. The cool thing about this is you're going to get different angles every single time. The first layer has angles of 37 degrees and 53 degrees. The second layer, 74-16. The third layer, 21-69. And you could keep going on and on and on, achieving all kinds of different angles with this. The only limiting factor is going to be your stack height. So as long as you can afford to have a super high stack height, you can get tons of different angles out of this same grid. 5832, 86.4, 49.41, 78.12, and on and on and on. Pretty cool. Another cool thing you can do, and I don't know how useful this would be, but I'm sure you could think of a cool technique for it or a cool use for it. You can take a sugar grid going in the opposite direction. See how these are opposites? And stick it down on the sugar grid with the studs right on top of the other ones. And this will give you an angled plate here. But on top of this, you can straighten it back out. So you can have a lower level be at an angle, and then the top layer be in the standard Lego grid formation. Pretty cool. Now playing around with this got me thinking, is this the only way you can have another grid that you can stick parts down in any orientation? And the answer is no. In fact, I believe there are infinite different grids that you can stick parts down in any orientation. The only limiting factor is going to be spacing between the studs. This one is the most convenient because the studs are the closest together and it has the greatest, let's say, fill, meaning that you have 1/5 of the studs of a normal Lego base plate. For every one stud, you have 4 studs that are going to be blank. But this led me to think about what other grid could I make. So I set out to find another grid, and I went back to the origins of how I came up with this grid in the first place. So if we take a 2x6 plate, it's worth noting that the distance from this stud to this stud is exactly the same as the distance from this stud to this stud. So if we take that measurement and we plot it on our grid, we know that the distance from here to here is also equal to the distance from here to here, meaning we can rotate this piece and stick it at an angle. And the other cool thing about it is we can take this same design and we can square it with a 6x6, sticking at the same angle, but we also now have 2 dimensions. So we can also plug in plots here and here, and this should stick on our grid just fine. So here we can take another plate, offset it by 1, rotate, and stick. And we have a perfect connection. This grid then can be extrapolated across an entire base plate, thus creating what I call the Super Sugar Grid, or the Sugar Grid XL. And the reason I call it that is, if we take our sugar grid and put it inside, it lines up just 1 stud out further. And this works as a great template, and I think the easiest way to build this grid. Put one of these down, put the studs in, wash, rinse, repeat, over and over until you have the full grid. Now this grid looks like the sugar grid, and it has a lot of the same properties. For instance, any size plate can be stuck anywhere on this as long as you're in the proper orientation. And these are not horribly far apart, so it's still fairly useful. I would recommend using larger plates with this. If you use smaller ones, you're going to run into a lot of stuff like this, where it's not well supported. Another trick you can do with the Super Sugar Grid, you can put a 2x2 jumper in the middle, and that will have no problem attaching in the middle. The only problem the jumper is going to give you is if you're attaching on an edge, it will get in the way of the edge of the plate. These studs will attach anywhere. You're never going to have an issue with these studs. The jumpers cannot attach on the edges. But if you're trying to plug a smaller piece in, it can be a really good way to get added support, especially if it's hanging off the end or something like that. Now you might be saying, well, what's so significant about this grid? It's a different angle, sure, and I was just trying to find ways of attaching different angles. But then I measured the angle. And that's when the aha moment happened. Let me show you. So if we put a plate on here, and we stick it at the angle, and we put some bricks on here to measure that angle. Let me grab the world's worst protractor. This is probably hard for you guys to see, but the angle that these fall at is actually 22.5 degrees. Now 22.5 degrees is significant because it's half of the magic number that everyone is always trying to achieve, 45 degrees. Now one of my biggest struggles in math and in Lego is square root 2. Square root 2 screws up everything. And attaching things at 45 degrees and making it work in a square grid pattern is near impossible. But if this is at 22.5 degrees, if I can double that angle, I can make a 45. So I took a second super sugar square, line it up, rotate it one, stick it down. And then another base plate. Line it up, rotate it one, stick it down. Get the world's worst protractor out, and we are right on a 45 degree angle. Now there are a lot of ways to achieve a 45 degree angle. This is not the only one. But if we can implement this on a larger scale, we can have a plate sitting on top of a base plate at 45 degrees with multiple connection points. That to me is groundbreaking. That is super significant. And so I played around with this a little bit, and I'll show you what I came up with and how I think this could be implemented really well in a MOC. So here I have a base plate, and I basically turned this into a Mills plate. I've got one brick layer on here, and then on top I put tile. You could put plate and then tile if you want. It doesn't really matter, but this is essentially a Mills plate. So you could build this right into the base of your city or your MOC, whatever you're building, if you're building with Mills plates. Now with that being said, we have one layer of super sugar grid down inside this diamond shape that I've carved out of this Mills plate. So at this point we can start putting plates in here to create our second layer. And then we're going to create our second sugar square on top of this layer. Now I've laid out the first four here, and getting the pattern just right is actually quite difficult. I'm sure there's some math that can be done. If you know me by now, I hate math. I'm terrible at math. I love playing with math. I'm just bad at equations. So we can use our template here to lay out the rest of the studs, making sure we have the spacing right. If one stud is off, it's going to drive you nuts because if you can't see it, you're going to wonder why the thing won't click down. And it's because one stud is out of place. Just like that one. All right, so our grid is in place. Cross our fingers. We can now take our top, which is just a 16 by 16 plate with a 2-stud overhang on all sides, and it should drop right into place at a perfect 45 degree angle. Completely solid. You could build a house, a tower, whatever you want on top of that. I know there's other ways to do this, but I think this is the most solid connection, perfectly legal. I believe it's perfectly 45 degrees. I might be wrong about that. Somebody can check the math on it. But there we have a 45 degree connection with a Mills plate and 2 super sugar grids. Well, I hope you guys liked this video. I hope you found these techniques useful. If you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments. I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'm going to do more just like this in the future, and we will see you next time.